It says to factor the trinomial 6x squared plus 4x minus 16. Now, any time you factor a polynomial of any type, the first thing we should always do is look for a greatest common factor. And while I didn't mention that in the last example we did with factor by grouping, we should always start that way. So when you look at 6x squared plus 4x minus 16, we see that there's a 2 common to all three terms. So if we factor that 2 out, we end up with 2 times 3x squared plus 2x minus 8. And now we need to continue to factor by trying to factor this trinomial. Now, the leading coefficient is a 3, and it's not that bad to try to factor this using trial and error. But I'm going to show the factor by grouping method again just to get some more practice with that. So the basic steps for factoring by grouping were starting out by taking the leading coefficient times the constant. Now this time we're saying the leading coefficient is 3 because we're working on this trinomial now. The 2 has been factored out, and we need to keep that 2. It's part of our answer. But for purposes of factoring the trinomial, the leading coefficient is 3. The constant is a negative 8. So when you multiply that 3 times that negative 8, we get a negative 24. And the second step is to find two numbers whose product is equal to a negative 24, the number we just found, and whose sum is equal to positive 2. That's the middle coefficient of the trinomial. Well, the two numbers that will do that for us will be a positive 6 times a negative 4. Because you multiply 6 times negative 4, you're going to get negative 24. And when you add these two together, you're going to get a positive 2. So then we take the original trinomial. Now, again, we're talking about factoring this trinomial. So I'm going to take the 2 and bring it down just so we don't forget he's there. But we take the 3x squared plus the 2x minus the 8. And we split up that middle term. So we have 2. And then the trinomial now will look like this. 3x squared plus 6x minus 4x minus 8. Again, what we just did was took the middle term, the 2x, and we broke it down so that it looks like 6x minus 4x, using those two numbers we found up in step 2. Alright, now we want to take this 4-term polynomial here and factor it using factor by grouping. Now, I'm not going to carry this 2 for now, but I got to make sure we don't forget it. We come back and get this 2 later. But just to keep things from looking too complicated, we take this polynomial in the parentheses, we group it as 3x squared plus 6x, first group. The second group is going to be 4x plus 8. We've got to be really careful with the signs. Notice that that's 4x plus 8, not minus 8. There's a negative on the outside of the parentheses here. And imagine trying to go from these two groups back to this 4-term polynomial. The negative would distribute through the parentheses, giving me negative 4x and minus 8. So, long story short, if there's a minus in front of that group, just be very careful with your signs. Okay, now we factor a 3 and an x from the first group, which would leave us with x plus 2 in parentheses. And we factor a 4 from the second group, which leaves us with x plus 2 in parentheses. And we notice that both of these terms have an x plus 2 in common. And so we factor that out. There's our GCF, x plus 2. We factor that x plus 2 from the first term. We have 3x, bring down our minus. We factor the x plus 2 from the second term. We're left with 4. So this 4-term polynomial that we had up here factors as x plus 2 times 3x minus 4. Don't forget, though, we have this 2 that we factored out way in the beginning. That's still part of our factorization. So the correct factorization is 2 times x plus 2 times 3x minus 4, which, by the way, could be written as 2 times 3x minus 4 times x plus 2. Because I've got these three factors, and it doesn't matter what order we write them. So be aware that if you're looking at a multiple choice type question, that either one of these would be considered correct.